A four-time MVP just signed the richest contract in the history of women's basketball, and the player everyone assumed would get there first isn't even close. Somewhere inside this new deal is a rule the league will never put a name on, and the person it was built for has never once been credited for it on paper. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how a $78,000 salary turned into a $530,000 one, why the richest contract in league history did not go to the player you're thinking of, and what a quiet clause buried inside 200 pages of legal language is about to do to one roster that is not built to survive it. Stay until the end, because the number that changes everything for that roster doesn't show up until the very last section, and once you see it, you'll understand why front offices across this league are quietly panicking right now. Before we get into it, hit subscribe. This channel breaks down the business side of sports that nobody else is covering in this kind of detail. And if you want to actually understand what's happening behind the headlines instead of just reading them, this is where you need to be. The salary that couldn't be defended. Let's start with the number that made this entire negotiation inevitable. In the 2025 season, Caitlin Clark's official WNBA salary was $78,066. That is not a typo. That is the actual, verified, contractually obligated amount the Indiana Fever paid the most talked about player in professional women's basketball. For context, that is roughly what an entry-level marketing coordinator or a mid-level paralegal earns in a mid-sized American city. Now put that next to what she actually made that year. According to Sportico's 2025 rankings of the highest-paid female athletes in the world, Clark's total earnings came out to an estimated $16.1 million. $16 million of that came from endorsements: Nike, State Farm, Gatorade, Wilson, and a growing list of other partners. Only $114,000 of it came from the WNBA itself. Once you count bonuses, that means 99.3% of her income had nothing to do with the league she was playing in. She ranked 6th on that list, ahead of most of the biggest names in tennis and gymnastics, despite playing in only about a third of the Fever's games that season due to injury. Sit with that for a second. The league was paying less than 1% of what the open market was willing to pay for the same player. That is not a rounding error. That is a structural failure. And it's the exact kind of gap that forces institutions to change, not because they suddenly develop a conscience, but because the numbers become too embarrassing to defend in public. The negotiation. Nobody wanted to have that gap, is what walked into the room when the WNBA and the Women's National Basketball Players Association sat down to negotiate a new collective bargaining agreement. The talks dragged on for more than 17 months. There were extended deadlines, real fears of a lockout heading into the 2026 season, and a stretch where it looked genuinely possible that the year could start without a deal in place at all. And the reason it dragged on that long wasn't salary numbers in isolation. It was one specific fight underneath all of it: revenue share. Historically, WNBA players received something in the range of 9.3% of league revenue, compared to a figure close to 50% for NBA players in their own league. When formal proposals started getting exchanged, the players pushed for 30% of gross revenue. The league's opening offers worked out to somewhere closer to 15% of that same gross figure, structured instead as roughly 70% of net revenue after expenses, along with a proposed salary cap around $5 million to $5.65 million. Neither side was close to the other for a long stretch of these talks, and multiple reports over the course of negotiations described league projections claiming the players' full proposal could cost the league hundreds of millions of dollars, projections the union side publicly disputed. What both sides eventually landed on was a guaranteed 20% average revenue share over the life of the deal, tied directly to league and team revenue rather than arbitrary growth targets that had made the old revenue-sharing language largely symbolic. It's still short of what the players originally pushed for, but it's more than double what they'd historically been getting, and for the first time, it's not contingent on hitting benchmarks that were nearly impossible to reach. In March 2026, with roughly 50 days left before the season was scheduled to open, the two sides finally reached an agreement, first through a signed term sheet, and then through full ratification by the players and the league's board of governors. The numbers in that agreement are staggering compared to where this league was even 1 year earlier. The total salary cap jumped from $1.5 million in 2025 to $7 million in 2026, close to a five-fold increase in a single offseason. The average player salary, which had been sitting around $120,000, is now projected at roughly $583,000 for 2026, with the league expecting it to climb past $1 million by 2032. Minimum salaries, tiered by years of service, now range from $270,000 to $300,000, up from a league minimum of about $66,000 the year before. Even the championship bonus jumped from $22,908 per player in 2025 to $60,000 in 2026. The deal also brought in league-wide charter air travel, upgraded facility and staffing standards, and an expanded roster size. For a sense of what the old numbers actually cost real players, not just headline names, Chicago Sky forward Angel Reese has publicly said her 2023 rookie scale salary of $73,439 didn't even cover her rent. That's the environment this CBA was negotiated to fix. This is, by any honest measure, the biggest single financial jump this league has ever made. But the headline number everyone is celebrating isn't actually the most interesting part of this deal. The most interesting part is a single clause buried deep in the contract language, one that nobody in the league office wants to explain too clearly, because explaining it clearly means admitting exactly who it was written for. The clause without a name. It's called EPIC, Exceptional Performance on Initial Contract. Here's what it actually does. Under the old system, a rookie was locked into her 4-year rookie scale deal, no matter how good she turned out to be. A player could win Rookie of the Year, get named to an all-WNBA team, even come close to winning MVP, and none of it mattered contractually until that 4-year deal expired. EPIC changes that. If a player earns a spot on the all-WNBA first or second team during any of her first 3 seasons, she becomes eligible to renegotiate into a maximum contract before her 4th season even starts. And if that player wins MVP within those first 3 years, she becomes eligible for the full Supermax. The official league language around EPIC is completely neutral. It talks about performance thresholds and contract eligibility windows in the dry, technical tone that labor lawyers spend entire careers perfecting. Nowhere in that language does a single player's name appear. But everyone who sat in that negotiating room for those 17-plus months knows exactly which situation this clause was designed to solve. Caitlin Clark was named to the All-WNBA First Team as a rookie in 2024, the only rookie to earn that honor. She generated a level of commercial impact the league had genuinely never dealt with before, while remaining locked into a rookie salary structure that was written for an entirely different era of the sport. EPIC exists because that specific mismatch became impossible for the league to justify going forward. Under the new rookie scale, Clark's 2026 salary jumps to approximately $530,000. Still a fraction of her market value, but a 500+% increase from where she started. Because of her existing all-WNBA nod, she's already on track to qualify for a projected maximum salary of about $1.3 million in 2027. And if she wins MVP before then, EPIC opens the door to a Supermax extension projected at $1.7 million in 2028. One that under the rules would require a minimum 3-year commitment and could realistically lock her into Indiana through 2030. Clark isn't the only one this clause touches either. Indiana teammate Aliyah Boston and Dallas Wings guard Paige Bueckers, both named to the 2025 All-WNBA second team, are also positioned to qualify for early max extensions under EPIC. This isn't a one-player carve-out disguised as neutral legal language. It's a structural mechanism the league now has to apply every time a young player breaks through early, which means the exact scenario we're about to walk through with Indiana is going to keep repeating itself across the league for years, on a schedule teams can now actually plan for instead of getting blindsided by. That's the mechanism. Simple on paper, seismic in practice. But here's where the story most people are telling gets it backwards. The contract that already happened. If you've been anywhere near sports media in the last few months, you've probably seen the narrative that goes something like this. Caitlin Clark is about to become the highest paid player in league history, and veteran stars who built this league for years are being quietly pushed aside while she cashes in. That narrative is not what actually happened. It's not even close. The highest paid player in WNBA history right now is Aliyah Wilson. In April 2026, shortly after the new CBA was ratified, Wilson signed a 3-year Supermax contract to stay with the Las Vegas Aces. The deal is structured as a floating Supermax tied directly to the salary cap rather than a fixed number, starting at $1.4 million in 2026 and carrying an average annual value of $1.67 million, which at the time made her the first WNBA player in history to cross the $1 million a year threshold. If the cap rises to its maximum allowable levels through 2028, the total value of that contract could exceed $4.7 million. That is the richest deal this league has ever produced, and it belongs to a 4-time MVP, 3-time champion who took team-friendly deals for years while this league figured out how to pay its stars what they were actually worth. So the honest version of this story isn't Clark is about to leapfrog everyone. It's the opposite. As of right now, Clark is making $530,000. Wilson is making close to $1.67 million on average. The gap between the league's most commercially explosive player and its most decorated one is enormous, and it's not closing anytime soon. Clark won't even be eligible for her own Supermax until 2028 at the earliest, and only if she wins MVP first. What makes Wilson's situation genuinely complicated isn't that she got overlooked. It's that for years, she carried the public fight for better pay in this league, advocated for exactly the kind of structural change that produced this CBA, and built a Hall of Fame-level resume doing it. 3 championships, 4 MVPs, an Olympic gold medal, while never generating the kind of viral, cross-demographic commercial explosion that turned Clark into a $16 million a year brand before she'd even played a full, healthy season. Those are 2 completely different types of value to a league. One is on-court dominance sustained over a career. The other is the ability to move television ratings, ticket sales, and jersey numbers overnight. This new CBA, through clauses like Epic and the new Supermax structure, ended up rewarding both sides, just not in the order, or at the speed, that most of the online conversation assumed. And Wilson's deal didn't happen in isolation either. Her own Las Vegas teammates, Jackie Young, Chelsea Gray, and Jewel Lloyd, all of whom were themselves eligible for Supermax money, took team-friendly contracts around her to help the Aces keep their championship roster intact under the new cap. Young signed a regular max deal worth about $1.19 million. Gray signed a 3-year deal starting at $1 million. Lloyd, who had actually been on the Supermax under the old CBA for 4 straight seasons, agreed to a 3-year deal starting at $800,000. Every one of those numbers represents money those players could have argued for and didn't take, specifically so their franchise could stay competitive. That's the same basic trade-off Indiana is about to face with an entirely different roster and a much thinner margin for error. The Fever's real math. Here's the part of this story that almost nobody talking about the CBA is actually walking through in detail, and it's the reason we told you to stick around until the end. Now here's where it gets genuinely complicated for one specific franchise, because that same $7 million salary cap that sounds enormous compared to last year's $1.5 million starts to look a lot smaller once you actually try to build a full roster with it. Indiana used their one-year core designation on Kelsey Mitchell ahead of the 2026 season, locking her into a fully guaranteed supermax salary of $1.4 million. 20% of the entire team cap on a single player. Mitchell has more than earned it. She's a three-time All-Star who has quietly been one of the most dangerous scoring guards in the league for years, and re-signing her was reportedly the single highest priority for head coach Stephanie White and general manager Amber Cox heading into this offseason. Then there's Aliyah Boston. Rather than pushing for a full maximum payout, reporting indicates Boston took a deliberate pay cut relative to what she could have commanded, a move that helped Indiana keep its books workable while it locked in its other two stars. Add Clark's roughly $530,000 rookie-scale salary on top of Mitchell and Boston, and Indiana's core three consume about $2.93 million of their $7 million cap, a little under 42%. That leaves roughly $4.07 million to fill out the rest of an 8 or 9 player roster, which sounds workable until you remember this is a team trying to build immediate championship level depth around a core that just ate nearly half the budget in 3 roster spots. And the retention story for the rest of the roster is more settled than a lot of the speculation online suggested. Lexi Hull, who entered this offseason as a restricted free agent, was retained by Indiana through their matching rights after the team extended her a qualifying offer. She didn't get poached by a rival team chasing her rising market value. She's back in Indianapolis for a 5th season. Sophie Cunningham remains on Indiana's roster for 2026 as well, according to the league's official cap filings. None of that erases the core tension, though. Every dollar Indiana commits to its top 3 now is a dollar it doesn't have for bench scoring, front court depth, or a true backup point guard. The kind of roster pieces that separate teams that make noise in the playoffs from teams that actually win championships. And this cap math only gets more complicated from here, because in 2027, Clark's own number goes up dramatically if Epic kicks in the way it's projected to. The version of this roster Indiana is building right now is not the version they'll be managing in 18 months. Remember, too, that this is a franchise that has already been through one brutal reminder of how fragile a single season can be. In 2025, Indiana made the playoffs and pushed into the semifinals despite a wave of injuries. Clark herself missed extended stretches with soft tissue issues, and the roster around her also lost key rotation pieces to season-ending injuries at different points in the year. They still finished with a winning record and advanced further than most preseason expectations had them going. That's the context that makes this offseason's roster-building decisions matter so much. Indiana has already shown what this core can do, even when it's not at full strength. The question now is whether the front office can keep enough of that supporting cast intact under a cap that's tighter than the headline number suggests to find out what this team looks like at full strength. There's also a scheduling shift working against the margin for error here. The WNBA regular season is expanding under the new CBA, growing from its current 44-game slate toward 50 games by 2027 and potentially 52 by 2029. More games means more wear on a core that's already dealing with a heavier financial load relative to the rest of the roster, and it means less room for a thin bench to hide during a long stretch of the calendar. Whatever cap space Indiana has left after locking in its top 3, it needs to spend it on players who can actually hold up over a longer season, not just fill out a roster sheet. What comes next? Here's the timeline that actually matters going forward. In 2026, Clark plays under a rookie-scale deal worth roughly $530,000, a massive raise from where she started. But still, by any honest accounting, one of the most team-friendly contracts relative to actual value in professional sports right now. In 2027, if her current All-WNBA first-team credential holds under EPIC, she becomes eligible for a projected maximum salary around $1.3 million. Given the trajectory of the last 2 seasons, there's very little reason to think that jump won't happen close to on schedule. In 2028, if she's added an MVP award to her resume by then, the Supermax tier opens up. A projected $1.7 million, with the broader Supermax structure designed to climb toward $2.4 million by 2032 as the league's revenue grows. That would be the moment Clark's WNBA salary finally starts to approach the scale of her actual commercial value, though even then, the gap between her on-court pay and her sponsor income likely won't fully close. And every one of those milestones will land on top of a fever roster that is already operating with less flexibility than the headline $7 million cap number suggests. Whatever Indiana's front office does in the next 2 off-seasons, they'll be doing it while simultaneously trying to keep Mitchell, Boston, and a supporting cast intact around a superstar whose price tag is about to climb sharply on a timeline that gives them very little room for a mistake. Where this actually leaves the league. So here's the honest version of the story, the one that doesn't fit neatly into a single headline. This CBA is a genuine historic win for the players who spent years fighting for it. The veterans who took overseas contracts every offseason just to make a living wage. The union reps who sat through 17+ months of negotiations. The players who built this league's foundation long before the ratings boom made it an easy sell to sponsors. That progress is real, and it shouldn't be minimized. At the same time, Caitlin Clark's commercial impact is the specific reason clauses like Epic exist at all. A player generating this much value while earning a fraction of it on her actual contract is the kind of imbalance that forces institutions to rewrite their own rules. And that's exactly what happened here, even without her name appearing anywhere in the official text. And Aja Wilson, not Clark, is the one sitting at the top of the league's pay scale right now, holding the richest contract this sport has ever produced, a direct result of the same system everyone assumes was built around someone else entirely. Those 3 things are all true simultaneously. The league didn't have to choose between rewarding its most decorated veteran and acknowledging its most commercially explosive young star. This deal, messily and imperfectly, tried to do both at once. Whether it succeeds long-term depends entirely on what happens next. Whether Indiana can hold its roster together as Clark's number climbs, whether the rest of the league's rising stars start hitting their own epic thresholds and squeezing their team's caps the same way, and whether the gap between on-court pay and off-court endorsement money for players like Clark ever actually closes. That last question is the one nobody in the league office has an answer for yet, and it's the one that's going to define this entire CBA cycle far more than any single contract number will. Here's what to actually watch for over the next 18 months, because these are the exact triggers that will tell you which direction this goes. Watch what happens if Clark makes a real MVP push in 2026. Because the moment she does, Epic stops being a theoretical clause and becomes an active negotiation, and Indiana's cap math gets rewritten overnight, years ahead of schedule. Watch how the 2027 free agency period plays out for Indiana's supporting cast, since that's the year the league's revenue share formula shifts and the salary cap calculation changes with it, which means the number Indiana is planning around right now isn't fixed. And watch whether any other young star breaks out the way Clark did in 2024, because the entire point of Epic is that it isn't a one-time rule for one player, it's a permanent mechanism, and the next team it blindsides might not have anywhere near the revenue cushion Indiana has to absorb it. So the real story here was never just about one contract or one player or one clause with no name attached to it. It's about a league that spent years underpaying its best players, got forced into a 17-month reckoning by numbers it could no longer explain away, and came out the other side with a system that's still figuring out in real time how to price what these players are actually worth. The next franchise to hit this exact wall might not be Indiana. It might be a team nobody's even talking about yet, sitting on a young star who's about to have the kind of breakout season that triggers all of this again. If you think Indiana can hold this roster together through Clark's prime years, or if you think the cap squeeze is going to force a breakup before this core ever gets a real shot at a championship, drop your take in the comments below. And if you want to see exactly how this plays out over the next 2 off-seasons, make sure you're subscribed, because this is a story that's only going to get more interesting from here.